and welcome to 3Q, where I interview industry professionals for just 15 minutes by asking three powerful questions. I'm your host, Rachel Vogel, and joining me on tonight's episode is Ashley Austin, the founder and CEO of Artist Legacy Group, which is a full-service estate management firm. Ashley's company is devoted to managing the legacies of iconic personalities, including overseeing the licensing of name, likeness, and other intellectual property rights for film, television, literary, and documentary projects, brand collaborations, and consumer products. Her carefully curated roster is made up of household names, including culturally significant artists like Ronnie Spector and the Ronettes, Sam Cooke, the Blues Brothers, and so many more creators who have impacted our collective pop culture in so many important ways. So, Ashley, thank you for being here. How's it going?
Going good. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Are you ready to dive in with the first question?
I am.
Imagine for a second you're sitting down with your 25-year-old self. What one piece of advice would you give her on a personal note? And what one piece of advice would you give her from a business perspective?
Well, okay. So my 25-year-old self was business and personal was very intertwined. So I'm going to kind of combine the answers if that's okay. First and foremost, I would say really value your worth. There's a lot of power in the word no. And at that time coming up early in my career, and you don't have a ton of power. You say yes to a lot of things that you may not necessarily want to. So on the professional front, I would also just tell my 25-year-old self, like, look, there's going to be a lot of ups and downs in this business, and don't get emotional about it. It is just business, and a job is never guaranteed for the long term. Don't get too comfortable and don't ever let your guard down. Always be 10 steps ahead in your thinking and have a plan for what the next move is going to be just in case, and don't ever let anybody else dictate your destiny.
All great advice. Does any like particular situation come to mind in like the early part of your career where it was like a time that you had to stand up for yourself or figure out how to navigate a tricky situation and you were like, how do I do this? And you just had to kind of
Yeah.
like walk yourself through it.
Yeah, I'm not going to call out specific instances, but there are kind of three pivotal moments in my career. One was leaving the talent agency. The second was during the recession in '08 and my departure from Frontline, and the third was my departure from my previous estate management firm and the launch of ALG. And those were the moments that I can really look back on and say, wow, I made the right choice. You
Mhm.
know, and now being my own boss is just the way that I thrive.
So before we move on to the next question, estate management is a huge part of the business, but I think
Yeah.
that it's one of the least talked about. Not many
Yeah.
people know the ins and outs of that part of the business. I'm curious, like, what led you to having an interest in creating an estate management firm, and how did you take the steps to do that?
Yeah, I think at that point, early in my estate management career, I didn't realize that was an actual business. And I wasn't privy to growing up, all the ins and outs of the music business, unfortunately, and I had to sort of uncover them as I went along. And when the concept of estate management was presented to me, I was like, wow, okay, so just because an artist is gone or the band breaks up, the machine doesn't stop rolling. The revenue doesn't stop coming in, merchandise doesn't stop being created. There are people actively managing these artists, these estates, and that's how John Lennon, Bob Marley, all of these other Tupac, like how these estates are still thriving. And that was so fascinating to me because to tell me I could still work with the artist that I love, even though they're not active anymore. I was like, sign me up. How do I get into that? And then at that point, there weren't a lot of options for estates. And I felt that an estate should have the same opportunity as a living legend and be able to shop for management, the way that an active artist would. And so that was the genesis of the launch of ALG.
That's awesome. Can you share a little bit about what goes into managing an estate? Because that covers like film,
Yeah, we look at
documentary. Yeah.
everything, all media, book publishing. We cover social media. We'll oversee your website. We're looking at license deals. We're handling inbound requests. it's all encompassing. Kind of every aspect of the artist we're looking at. We're making sure label projects are happening and we're working with them to coordinate and market things effectively and just super serve our current fan base and introduce, the acts to younger generations, in the means that they consume their
Mm,
content.
really cool. All right, moving on to the next question. Every industry has its dirty little secrets, and we all know that's no different in the music industry. Sometimes people think that's a bad thing, but that is not always the case. Sometimes they can be good. So, what's one secret you would like to share with our listeners about the industry?
It's not a dirty little secret by any means, but it's a secret that I wasn't privy to early in my career, and I wish it had been drilled into me that this is a very small industry. It's a tight network, and you're probably 1 degree of separation from a really life-changing contact. And so
Hmm.
your network and how you conduct yourself within that network is essential to the success of your longevity in this business. And so those are words to live by.
That's so true. I feel like I've said it before on this podcast, but I say it all the time. I feel like the music industry is almost like New York City, where it feels huge, but like you'll see the same people walking up and down the street every day.
Yeah, and your reputation is everything. And I really,
Totally.
I take a lot of pride in that.
Final question. Throughout your career, I can only imagine you've been asked plenty of questions, whether for an industry conference, the media, or even a promotion. But throughout all of those interviews and all of those questions, there has to be one that you've never been asked but would have liked to. So, what is that question and what would be your answer?
That is a really great question. And the first thing that comes to mind is that, when I'm interviewed, people are very curious about the artists and the projects that we have going on. I have yet to be asked about what the future of ALG holds. And I think, I'm constantly plotting and scheming, my next 5, 10 years and what I want the business to look like and how I want to expand my reach and expand my offering in the same way I plot the future of my artists, I plot for myself. So I think that's kind of the question that never really gets talked about. Like for estate management as a business, what's the future of that? How is
Hmm.
that going to look in this ever-changing landscape? Also, when you have, these big companies buying up catalogs and buying up name and likeness and merch rights, kind of where does that leave estate management?
Well, very excited to see what the next 10 years look like for you. All right. Well, it's about time we close out the episode. So, Ashley, thank you again for joining me. And to everyone listening, hope you enjoyed tonight's episode. Stay tuned for next week of 3Q, where I interview industry professionals for just 15 minutes by asking three powerful questions. See you next time.